The fluorescent lights of the conference room cast harsh shadows across Maya Thompson's face as she reached for the laser pointer, and that was when Jean-Woo Park first saw them. Dark purple marks wrapped around her wrist like a bracelet of pain, partially hidden beneath the cream blazer she wore with such professional precision. His breath caught in his throat, the quarterly projections on the screen suddenly meaningless, as every protective instinct he had tried to suppress over the past 2 years roared to life. Maya continued her presentation with the same brilliant confidence that had first caught his attention when she joined his marketing team, her voice steady as she outlined their expansion strategy for the Korean market. She had no idea that her sleeve had shifted just enough to reveal what she had been so carefully hiding. No idea that the man who had been fighting his growing feelings for her was now seeing the evidence of something that made his hands clench into fists beneath the polished conference table. Where are you watching this story unfold tonight? And have you ever noticed the signs that someone close to you might be hiding their pain behind a perfect smile? Sometimes the strongest people carry the heaviest burdens in silence. 2 years ago, Maya had walked into Jean-Woo's Seoul headquarters as the newly hired director of international marketing, her credentials from Harvard Business School impressive enough to catch the attention of his board of directors. But it was her presentation on cross-cultural brand positioning that had captured his imagination. She spoke about bridging worlds with the kind of passion that came from personal experience, her insights revealing a depth of understanding that went far beyond textbook knowledge. Jean-Woo had built Park Industries from a small family import business into a multinational corporation worth billions, and he had learned to read people the way others read financial statements. Maya was different from the beginning. Where other executives performed for his approval, she challenged his assumptions with respectful intelligence. Where others saw obstacles in expanding to Western markets, she saw opportunities that no one else had considered. She had transformed their marketing department within 6 months, her campaigns increasing their North American market share by 30% in the first year alone. But it was the quiet moments that had drawn Jean-Woo to her, the way she stayed late to mentor junior staff members, the way she remembered personal details about everyone from the cleaning crew to the senior executives. She treated his elderly secretary with the same warm respect she showed to the board members, switching effortlessly between English and the Korean she had been learning with remarkable dedication. The connection between them had grown slowly, professionally at first, then something deeper that neither of them had acknowledged aloud. Jean-Woo found himself looking forward to their strategy meetings, extending them longer than necessary just to hear her laugh at his attempts at American humor. Maya brought him coffee the way he liked it without being asked, stayed to discuss cultural nuances long after the formal meetings ended, shared stories about her childhood in Atlanta that painted pictures of a family who had sacrificed everything for her education. But something had changed 6 months ago, subtle shifts that his business-trained instincts had noticed even when his heart had tried to ignore them. Maya had always been impeccably dressed, but now her clothing choices seemed more calculated. Blazers with longer sleeves even in the summer heat, scarves worn in patterns that seemed designed for coverage rather than style. Her punctuality, once reliable as clockwork, became erratic in small ways. She would arrive exactly on time instead of her usual 5 minutes early, and there were days when she would jump slightly if someone entered her office unexpectedly. The brilliant confidence that had made her presentations legendary began to show tiny cracks around the edges. She still delivered exceptional work, her strategic thinking as sharp as ever, but Jean-Woo noticed how she checked her phone more frequently during meetings, how her shoulders would tense when it buzzed with notifications. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup could not quite conceal, and sometimes he caught her staring out the window with an expression that looked like calculation, as if she were measuring distances or planning escapes. Jean-Woo had tried to tell himself he was imagining things, that his growing feelings for Maya were making him overprotective and paranoid. She was a grown woman, accomplished and intelligent, certainly capable of handling whatever personal challenges she might be facing. But the evidence was building in ways that his analytical mind could not dismiss, small details that painted a picture he did not want to see. Last month, Maya had missed the company holiday party, claiming illness, but when Jean-Woo had stopped by her office the next morning to check on her, he had found her there at 7 in the morning, working with a dedication that seemed more like escape than enthusiasm. Her explanation about feeling better had been delivered with the kind of smile that was too bright, too practiced, too careful. When he had asked about her weekend plans, Maya had given him vague answers that sounded rehearsed, deflecting his questions with compliments about his presentation skills or updates about project timelines. The brilliant woman who had once shared stories about her family with easy warmth now spoke about her personal life in careful generalities. She had stopped mentioning her boyfriend Marcus entirely, the man she had talked about with such affection during her first year at the company. Jinwoo remembered feeling a stab of jealousy whenever Maya had mentioned Marcus's name. The way her face had lit up when she talked about their weekend trips or the flowers he surprised her with at the office. Those flowers had stopped coming months ago, and Maya no longer took personal calls during lunch breaks. The animated conversations that had once carried through her office door replaced by a silence that felt heavy with unspoken weight. When the other women in the office planned their monthly dinner outings, Maya began declining with excuses that sounded reasonable but felt carefully constructed, as if she were protecting some secret that required constant vigilance. Now, watching Maya adjust her sleeve with a casual gesture that seemed designed to hide rather than reveal, Jinwoo felt the pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. The woman who had fearlessly challenged his business assumptions, who had negotiated million-dollar contracts with the confidence of someone born to leadership, was hiding bruises with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that survival sometimes required perfect performance. Maya finished her presentation to enthusiastic applause from the board members, her smile radiant as she fielded their questions with the expertise that had made her invaluable to the company. But Jinwoo saw what others missed, the way her hand trembled slightly as she gathered her materials, the careful way she moved as if certain parts of her body required protection, the flash of fear that crossed her features when her phone buzzed against the table. As the meeting dispersed, Jinwoo made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. Maya Thompson was not just his employee anymore, had not been for months if he was being honest with himself. She was the woman who had changed the way he thought about business, about connection, about the possibility of finding someone who could understand both sides of his cultural identity. She was brilliant and kind and stronger than anyone he had ever known, and someone was hurting her in ways that made his successful empire feel powerless and small. He was going to find out what was happening to Maya, and he was going to stop it, regardless of what it cost him professionally or personally. Some things mattered more than propriety or professional boundaries, and Maya's safety had just become the most important project of his life. Maya's hands shook as she fumbled with her keys outside her apartment door, the weight of Marcus's silence from inside, making her stomach clench with familiar dread. She could hear the television volume turned up too loud, which meant he had been drinking since she left for work that morning, which meant the questions would start the moment she walked through the door. Where had she been? Who had she been talking to? Why had her presentation run 15 minutes longer than scheduled? Marcus Williams had not always been this way. Or perhaps Maya had simply been too blinded by his initial charm to see the warning signs that now seemed so obvious in retrospect. When they had met 3 years ago at a networking event in Atlanta, he had been everything her family had hoped she would find. Successful in his own right as a regional sales manager, handsome in the conventional way that made her mother beam with approval, confident enough to approach the Harvard-educated marketing executive who intimidated most men at professional gatherings. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of expensive dinners and weekend getaways, Marcus showering her with attention that felt like validation after years of academic and professional focus. He had encouraged her career ambitions, or so it had seemed, celebrating her job offer from Park Industries with champagne and promises that their relationship could survive anything, including her relocation to Seoul. The first cracks had appeared 6 months after Maya moved to Korea, when Marcus had followed her with plans to build his own business in the emerging Asian markets. His sales experience had not translated as smoothly as expected, his American aggressive approach clashing with the subtle relationship building that defined Korean business culture. Maya had tried to help, offering introductions and cultural guidance, but her success had only highlighted his struggles, turning his frustration into something darker and more personal. The man who had once celebrated her achievements now questioned every professional triumph with accusations disguised as concern. When Maya had been promoted to lead the international expansion team, Marcus had responded with a 3-day silent treatment followed by a lecture about how her success was making their relationship unbalanced. When she had received recognition from the board of directors, he had suggested that perhaps Jean Woo Park was showing her favoritism for reasons that had nothing to do with her qualifications. Marcus's jealousy had evolved into control with a patience that Maya had not recognized until it was too late. He had started small, questioning her choice of clothing for important meetings, suggesting that perhaps her professional wardrobe was too revealing, too attention-seeking. He had begun monitoring her social media presence, deleting photos he deemed inappropriate, unfriending male colleagues without her knowledge. When Maya had protested, Marcus had twisted her objections into evidence of her own guilt, making her feel as if her desire for autonomy was somehow a betrayal of their relationship. The physical violence had started as accidents, or at least that was how Marcus had framed them and how Maya had chosen to believe them. A grip that was too tight during an argument, leaving fingerprint-shaped bruises on her upper arms. A push during a heated discussion that sent her stumbling into the kitchen counter, resulting in a back injury she had explained away as a gym mishap to her concerned colleagues. But accidents had a way of becoming patterns when the person causing them discovered how effectively they could end disagreements. And Maya had learned to read the warning signs in Marcus's body language the way meteorologists tracked approaching storms. The tightening around his eyes when she mentioned working late, the way his jaw clenched when she received phone calls from the office, the calculated calm in his voice when he asked questions that sounded reasonable but felt like interrogations. Maya pushed open the apartment door and found Marcus exactly where she had expected, sprawled across the couch with an empty whiskey bottle on the coffee table, his eyes tracking her movement with the focused intensity of a predator measuring prey. She had learned to move carefully in these moments, to keep her expression neutral, to offer explanations before accusations could form. Marcus asked her about the presentation, his tone deceptively casual as he muted the television to give her his full attention. Maya provided a detailed account of the meeting, mentioning the positive feedback from board members, carefully omitting the part where Jean Woo had lingered afterward to discuss her insights about consumer psychology. Some information had become too dangerous to share, intimate professional moments that Marcus would twist into evidence of inappropriate relationships. The next morning brought unexpected relief when Jean Woo approached Maya with a proposal that felt like a lifeline disguised as a business opportunity. Park Industries had been selected to partner with a major American retail chain for their Korean market entry, and he wanted Maya to lead the project as his direct report, working closely with him to navigate the cultural complexities that could make or break the expansion. Maya accepted the assignment with gratitude that went deeper than professional advancement. Working directly with Jean Woo meant longer hours at the office, legitimate reasons to stay late that even Marcus could not reasonably object to, and the opportunity to focus on work that challenged her intellectually rather than the careful emotional calculations that had begun to dominate her home life. The late evening strategy sessions in Jean Woo's office became the bright spots in Maya's increasingly difficult days. Away from the formal conference room dynamics, their conversations ranged beyond business strategy into territory that felt both professional and personally revealing. Jean Woo shared stories about building his company while honoring his family's traditional values, the challenges of balancing innovation with respect for cultural heritage. Maya found herself opening up about her own journey, the way she had learned to navigate predominantly white corporate spaces while maintaining her identity, the pride her parents felt in her success balanced against their concerns about her living so far from family. These conversations happened in the sanctuary of Jean Woo's office, with Seoul city lights creating a backdrop that made their work feel both important and intimate. Maya discovered that Jean Woo was funnier than his serious business persona suggested, his dry observations about corporate politics making her laugh in ways that reminded her of who she had been before fear had begun to shape her daily choices. He was also unexpectedly thoughtful, remembering details about her preferences, ensuring that dinner was ordered from restaurants that accommodated her dietary restrictions, asking questions about her perspective that suggested genuine interest rather than polite professionalism. But Maya's newfound professional happiness created proportional turbulence at home, where Marcus had begun tracking her work schedule with forensic precision. He would call the office at random times, claiming to want to surprise her with dinner plans. But his true purpose was clearly verification that she was where she claimed to be. When Maya received official notification of another promotion, making her the youngest woman ever to reach senior vice president level at Park Industries, Marcus had celebrated with a dinner that turned into an interrogation about whether she thought she was becoming too important for their relationship. The promotion meant a salary increase that made Maya one of the highest-earning marketing executives in Seoul, but it also meant increased visibility and responsibility that Marcus perceived as threats to his control. He had begun making comments about her ambition, suggesting that perhaps she was prioritizing career advancement over their relationship, questioning whether her success was worth the sacrifice of personal happiness. Maya learned to minimize her achievements when she talked to Marcus, downplaying recognition and deflecting praise in ways that felt like betraying herself but seemed necessary for maintaining peace at home. She had started taking calls from her family in the office rather than at the apartment, unwilling to let Marcus hear the pride in her mother's voice when she talked about Maya's accomplishments, afraid that even secondhand happiness would become ammunition in arguments she could not win. Jean Woo had begun to notice Maya's phone anxiety, the way she would tense visibly when notifications appeared on her screen during their meetings, the careful way she would check messages with expressions that suggested she was bracing for bad news rather than simple communication. When her phone rang during a late evening strategy session, Maya had jumped as if the sound were a physical blow, her face going pale in a way that made Jean Woo look up from his notes with immediate concern. Maya had excused herself to take the call in the hallway, but even through the closed office door, Jean Woo could hear the defensive tone in her voice, the careful explanations that sounded like someone providing alibis rather than sharing information about her day. When she returned to the office, Maya's earlier enthusiasm for their project had been replaced by a distracted tension that no amount of professional focus could completely hide. The pattern repeated itself over the following weeks, Maya's mood shifting dramatically based on the content of text messages and phone calls that seemed to arrive with calculated timing designed to maximum disruption. Jean Woo watched the woman who had fearlessly challenged Fortune 500 executives become increasingly jumpier around sudden noises, more anxious about schedule changes, more careful about sharing personal information that had once flowed naturally in their conversations. Something was wrong in Maya's life outside the office, something that was beginning to affect not just her personal happiness, but her sense of safety in ways that made Jean Woo's protective instincts struggle against the boundaries of professional appropriateness. He wanted to ask direct questions, to offer help, to use his resources to solve whatever problem was creating the fear he could see growing in her eyes. But Maya had built walls around her personal life with the skill of someone who had learned that survival sometimes required perfect secrecy. And Jean Woo was beginning to understand that breaking through those walls would require more than good intentions and corporate authority. The rain had started falling just as Maya gathered her files at the end of another 14-hour day, the kind of soul downpour that transformed the city streets into rivers and made finding transportation nearly impossible. She stood at the lobby windows watching other employees hurry past with umbrellas and raincoats, calculating whether she could make it to the subway station without arriving home completely soaked, when Jean Woo appeared beside her with an expression of quiet determination. He offered her a ride home with the kind of casual politeness that made refusal seem churlish rather than professional boundary setting, mentioning that his driver was waiting and that her apartment was barely a detour from his own route. Maya hesitated, knowing that accepting would require explanations to Marcus that might be more complicated than getting drenched. But the storm outside made the decision for her, and she found herself settling into the leather seats of Jean Woo's sedan with gratitude that felt dangerously close to relief. The conversation during the drive started with work-related topics, their discussion of market penetration strategies and consumer demographics flowing with the easy rhythm they had developed during their late evening sessions. But as they moved through Seoul's traffic, their talk drifted into more personal territory, Jin-woo asking questions about Maya's adjustment to Korean culture that revealed genuine curiosity about her experience as a Black American woman navigating a society where she would always be visibly different. Maya found herself sharing stories she had not told anyone since arriving in Seoul. The small daily challenges of living in a place where her appearance drew constant attention, balanced against the unexpected kindness of elderly shopkeepers who practiced their English with her. The satisfaction of earning respect in a business culture that valued relationship building over aggressive self-promotion. Jin-woo listened with the kind of focused attention that made her feel heard rather than merely tolerated, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand her perspective rather than simply being polite. When they reached Maya's neighborhood, Jin-woo instructed his driver to pull over a block away from her building, and Maya felt a moment of surprised gratitude that he had somehow understood her need for discretion without requiring explanation. As she gathered her belongings, Jin-woo mentioned that he would be happy to provide transportation whenever their work schedule required late hours, framing the offer as a practical business consideration rather than personal concern. But Maya caught the undertone of protection in his voice that made her chest tighten with emotions she could not afford to examine too closely. Walking the final block to her apartment, Maya became acutely aware of how her shoulders tensed as she approached the familiar building, how her steps slowed as she calculated what mood Marcus might be in based on the timing of her arrival, whether the ride home with Jin-woo would require explanation or could be omitted from her evening report without technically being dishonest. The contrast between the easy conversation she had just shared and the careful verbal navigation that awaited her at home felt like moving from sunlight into shadow, and Maya realized that she had started measuring her happiness in increments of time spent away from Marcus's scrutiny. Over the following weeks, the evening rides became routine when their project demands required extended hours, and Maya began to understand that Jin-woo was creating opportunities for these conversations as much as responding to practical transportation needs. Their discussions ranged from business strategy to cultural observations, from family expectations to personal aspirations, creating a space where Maya could remember who she had been before fear had begun shaping her choices. Jin-woo shared stories about growing up in a family where tradition and innovation existed in constant tension, his parents' expectations that he honor their values while building something beyond their imagination, the loneliness of leadership when every decision affected hundreds of employees and their families. Maya talked about her childhood in Atlanta, her parents' sacrifices to provide her with opportunities they had never dreamed of, the pressure of being the first in her family to achieve this level of professional success, the way her accomplishments sometimes felt like living proof of possibilities rather than personal achievements. These conversations revealed similarities that transcended their different backgrounds, shared experiences of carrying family dreams alongside personal ambitions, of navigating professional spaces where their identity required constant navigation, of building success while maintaining authenticity. Maya discovered that Jin-woo understood the weight of representation in ways that most people could not, the exhaustion of being viewed as a symbol rather than an individual, the careful balance required to honor where you came from while reaching for where you wanted to go. But Maya's growing comfort with Jin-woo was creating corresponding tension at home, where Marcus had begun monitoring her schedule with investigative thoroughness. He started asking specific questions about her daily activities, requesting details about meetings and colleagues that went beyond casual interest into territory that felt like surveillance. When Maya mentioned working late with Jin-woo on the American retail project, Marcus had responded with questions about their working relationship that carried implications Maya was not ready to examine, suggestions that perhaps her boss was taking advantage of her dedication in ways that had nothing to do with business advancement. Marcus's suspicions manifested in increasingly intrusive behavior, phone calls to the office that interrupted important meetings, unexpected visits to Maya's workplace under the pretense of bringing her lunch or surprising her with flowers. These gestures appeared romantic to Maya's colleagues, but she recognized them as territorial marking, Marcus's way of establishing his presence in her professional space, claiming ownership in a domain where he had no legitimate authority. The corporate security team began reporting to Maya that a man matching Marcus's description had been seen in the building's lobby on multiple occasions when he was not scheduled to visit, asking questions about Maya's schedule and expressing frustration when told that employee information was confidential. Maya felt the walls of her carefully constructed separation between work and home beginning to crumble, her sanctuary being invaded by the same control that had already consumed her personal life. Jinwoo noticed the changes in Maya's behavior with the observational skills that had made him successful in business. The way she would check the lobby security cameras before leaving the building, how she had started varying her departure times and patterns that suggested evasion rather than preference. When Maya began declining the evening rides home, offering explanations that sounded rehearsed rather than spontaneous, Jinwoo understood that someone was monitoring her movements in ways that required her to minimize their professional relationship for reasons that had nothing to do with corporate policy. The realization that Maya was afraid of someone in her personal life triggered protective instincts in Jinwoo that went far beyond employer concern, feelings that he had been carefully managing for months but could no longer ignore. Maya was brilliant and strong and deserved to feel safe, and someone was making her afraid in ways that were beginning to affect her professional life, her personal happiness, her sense of security in spaces where she should have been able to thrive without fear. Jinwoo began implementing subtle changes designed to increase Maya's security without requiring her to acknowledge that protection was necessary. He arranged for building security to be increased during evening hours, citing general corporate safety policies rather than specific concerns. He started scheduling their project meetings in conference rooms with clear sightlines to the lobby, positioning himself where he could monitor who entered the building during their work sessions. When Maya needed to retrieve files from her apartment during weekend work sessions, Jinwoo suggested that important documents be duplicated and stored in the office to minimize the need for personal trips. These protective measures were implemented with the kind of discretion that allowed Maya to accept them without admitting vulnerability, but she was not naive about Jinwoo's intentions, and his thoughtfulness created complicated emotions that she was afraid to examine too closely. Maya had learned to be suspicious of men who offered help, to question whether kindness came with expectations that would eventually require payment, but Jinwoo's gestures felt different, protective without being possessive, supportive without being controlling. The trust building between them happened gradually, through shared cultural references that revealed their similar values, through professional challenges that demonstrated mutual respect, through small kindnesses that seemed designed to make Maya's life easier rather than creating obligations. When Maya mentioned missing her grandmother's cooking, Jinwoo arranged for the company cafeteria to prepare a Korean-American fusion menu that honored both cultures. When she expressed frustration about finding hair care products in Seoul, Jinwoo quietly arranged for international delivery services that made her favorite brands available without requiring special orders or explanations. Maya began to understand that Jinwoo was falling in love with her through actions rather than words, through protection offered without conditions, through respect that never wavered even when her personal situation created professional complications. But accepting his care meant acknowledging that she needed protection, admitting that her relationship with Marcus had become dangerous in ways that would require difficult choices about her future, decisions that could affect her career, her safety, and her ability to remain in the country that had become her professional home. The growing connection between Maya and Jinwoo existed in borrowed time between Marcus's surveillance and Maya's fear, moments of genuine intimacy that felt both precious and dangerous, creating hope that made her current situation feel more unbearable while offering possibilities that seemed both essential and impossible to achieve. Marcus was waiting for her when Maya stepped off the elevator, his presence in the apartment hallway creating an immediate spike of adrenaline that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of evening lay ahead. He had been drinking. She could tell from the particular way he held his shoulders, the calculated stillness that preceded his worst moments, and Maya's mind immediately began cataloging exit strategies and damage control tactics with the efficiency born of too much practice. The confrontation began before Maya could even unlock the apartment door. Marcus questioning her about the evening she had spent at the office, his voice carrying the deceptively calm tone that had learned to recognize as more dangerous than shouting. He knew about the project meetings with Jean Wu, had been monitoring her schedule with forensic precision, and now he wanted explanations for time that could not be accounted for, intentions that could not be proven innocent. Maya tried to answer his questions with the patient rationality that sometimes diffused his anger, explaining the demands of the American retail expansion, the complexity of cross-cultural marketing strategies, the professional necessity of working closely with the company's CEO on such a significant project. But Marcus was not interested in logical explanations. He was interested in confirmation of suspicions that had been growing in his mind like poison, fed by his own professional failures and Maya's continued success. The conversation escalated with a speed that Maya should have anticipated but somehow always hoped to avoid. Marcus accusing her of emotional infidelity, of prioritizing her relationship with Jean Wu over their partnership, of using her professional advancement to justify behavior that was destroying their relationship. When Maya tried to defend herself, pointing out that her career success benefited both of them, Marcus twisted her words into evidence of her selfishness, her ambition, her willingness to sacrifice their future for personal advancement. Maya made the mistake of mentioning that Jean Wu had never been anything but professional with her, that their working relationship was based on mutual respect and shared business goals, and Marcus interpreted her defense of Jean Wu as the final proof he needed that his girlfriend was emotionally invested in another man. The physical violence that followed was more severe than anything Maya had experienced before, fueled by months of resentment and the particular rage that came from feeling emasculated by a woman's success. The beating left Maya with injuries that could not be hidden with makeup or explained away as accidents, bruises that painted her ribs in shades of purple and yellow, a split lip that would require lies about falls and clumsiness, swelling around her left eye that made it difficult to open completely. When Marcus finally exhausted his anger, he left the apartment with threats about what would happen if Maya ever embarrassed him again, warnings about the consequences of choosing her career over their relationship. Maya spent the night on the bathroom floor, too hurt to make it to the bedroom, too afraid to seek medical attention that would require explanations she could not provide. She alternated between ice packs and hot showers, trying to reduce the swelling enough to make public appearance possible, practicing explanations for injuries that she knew would not withstand close scrutiny. By morning, Maya realized that she could not go to work, could not deliver the presentation she had prepared for weeks, could not face her colleagues with evidence of her private humiliation written across her face. She called in sick with excuses about food poisoning, her voice carefully modulated to hide the pain that made every breath feel like a struggle. Maya had never missed an important presentation before. Her reliability was one of her professional trademarks, and she knew that her absence would raise questions that she was not prepared to answer. But the alternative was explaining to a boardroom full of executives why their senior vice president looked like she had been in a car accident, and Maya was not ready to admit the truth even to herself. Jean Wu knew something was seriously wrong the moment he received Maya's call, her explanation about sudden illness delivered with a tremor in her voice that suggested pain rather than nausea. Maya had worked through actual food poisoning 6 months earlier, had never missed a deadline or canceled a presentation, and the timing felt too coincidental given the stress he had observed in her behavior over the past weeks. When she failed to answer follow-up calls checking on her condition, Jean Wu made a decision that crossed every professional boundary he had ever established. He drove to Maya's apartment with the kind of determination that comes from finally admitting truths that have been carefully avoided, armed with soup from her favorite restaurant and a story about needing her signature on urgent documents. Jean Wu told himself he was checking on a valued employee, but he knew his feelings went far deeper than professional concern, that Maya's well-being had become essential to his own happiness in ways that made maintaining appropriate distance impossible. The woman who answered the apartment door was barely recognizable as the confident executive who had commanded boardroom attention just days before. Maya's face was a canvas of injuries that told a story of deliberate violence, her movements careful and pained, her attempt at normalcy undermined by the obvious evidence of trauma. Jean Wu felt rage rise in his throat like bile, immediate and consuming, followed by a tenderness that made him want to gather Maya into his arms and promise that no one would ever hurt her again. Maya tried to maintain the fiction of illness, offering explanations about falls and clumsiness that sounded rehearsed and desperate. But the presence of someone who knew her well enough to see through her carefully constructed lies finally broke through the walls she had built around her pain. When Jinwoo asked her directly who had done this to her, Maya's composure crumbled completely. Months of fear and shame and carefully hidden terror pouring out in tears that seemed to surprise her with their intensity. She told him everything: the gradual escalation of Marcus's control, the way professional success had become personal danger, the careful calculations she made every day to minimize conflict while maximizing her own survival. Maya explained about the monitoring and the threats, the way Marcus used her love for her family as leverage, threatening to ruin her reputation in ways that would destroy not just her career, but her ability to support the people who depended on her success. Jinwoo listened with the kind of focused attention that made Maya feel heard rather than judged, his anger at Marcus carefully controlled in service of providing Maya with the safety she needed to speak truth she had been carrying alone. When she finished her explanation, he asked what she needed from him, how he could help, what resources she required to remove herself from a situation that had clearly become life-threatening. Maya's response revealed the depth of her isolation and fear, her conviction that reporting Marcus would result in professional consequences that would end her career, visa complications that would force her to return to the United States as a failure, family disappointment that would overshadow any concern for her personal safety. She had trapped herself in an impossible situation where survival required silence, where seeking help felt more dangerous than enduring continued abuse. Jinwoo realized that Maya's fears were not irrational, but based on realistic assessment of systems that often failed women in her position, particularly women whose professional status depended on maintaining perfect reputations, whose immigration status created additional vulnerabilities, whose success made them targets for exactly the kind of resentment that Marcus harbored. But he also knew that Maya would not survive many more encounters like the one that had left her face unrecognizable, that her safety required immediate action regardless of professional or personal consequences. He made promises to Maya that evening that would change both their lives permanently, commitments to use his resources and influence to protect her from Marcus, to ensure that her career would not suffer because she had been victimized, to provide her with alternatives that did not require choosing between safety and success. Jinwoo told Maya that she deserved protection without conditions, support without expectations, respect that honored her strength while acknowledging her vulnerability. Maya listened to his promises with the desperate hope of someone who had been drowning for months finally being offered rescue, but also with the realistic fear that accepting help would create new forms of dependence, new vulnerabilities that Marcus could exploit. She was afraid of becoming a burden to Jinwoo, afraid that her personal crisis would damage his reputation, afraid that needing protection made her weak in ways that would undermine everything she had worked to achieve. But as Jinwoo carefully tended to her injuries with the gentleness of someone handling something precious and fragile, Maya began to understand that accepting help did not require surrendering independence, that being protected could coexist with being powerful, that the man who had fallen in love with her strength was not threatened by her temporary vulnerability. For the first time in months, Maya allowed herself to imagine a future where fear did not dictate her choices, where her success could coexist with personal happiness, where love could mean safety rather than danger. The breaking point had been reached, but instead of shattering Maya completely, it had created space for truth, for help, for the possibility that survival might transform into something that looked remarkably like hope. Jinwoo had Maya moved to a corporate guest suite within 24 hours, the kind of secure accommodation typically reserved for visiting dignitaries and business partners requiring protection during sensitive negotiations. The penthouse apartment came with building security, controlled access, and staff trained in discretion, creating a sanctuary where Maya could heal without fear of Marcus tracking her movements or manipulating her environment. Maya initially resisted the gesture, concerned that accepting such expensive help would create obligations she could not fulfill, but Jinwoo framed the arrangement as temporary corporate housing while she recovered from what he officially described as a serious accident. His explanation satisfied the legal department while providing Maya with plausible cover for her temporary disappearance from her usual routine, allowing her to maintain professional dignity while accepting protection. The legal team that Jean Wu assembled moved with the efficiency of professionals accustomed to handling sensitive corporate matters, but their focus on Maya's case went far beyond normal business concerns. The restraining order application was filed with documentation that painted Marcus as a credible threat to employee safety, supported by security camera footage of his unauthorized building visits and witness statements from staff who had observed his increasingly erratic behavior during his workplace appearances. Maya found herself working with attorneys who specialized in domestic violence cases, women who understood the complexity of her situation without requiring extensive explanation, who helped her navigate legal processes that felt both empowering and terrifying. Filing official complaints against Marcus meant acknowledging publicly that she had been victimized, accepting a narrative about herself that felt both true and incompatible with her self-image as someone strong enough to handle any challenge. The restraining order was granted within a week, but Maya knew that legal documents would not necessarily protect her from Marcus's rage at being officially excluded from her life. His response to the legal action was exactly what she had feared, a campaign of professional sabotage designed to destroy her career if he could not control her personally, attacks that targeted her reputation with the precision of someone who understood her vulnerabilities. Marcus began contacting Maya's colleagues and clients with carefully crafted stories about her mental health, her reliability, her professional ethics, suggesting that her recent absence from work was evidence of instability rather than injury. He reached out to former classmates and professional contacts, spreading rumors about Maya's relationship with Jean Wu that painted her success as the result of personal favors rather than professional competence. The gossip campaign was designed to exploit cultural biases and professional jealousies, suggesting that Maya had used her identity as a black woman to gain unfair advantages, that her rapid advancement was evidence of diversity initiatives rather than merit, that her relationship with Jean Wu compromised her objectivity and the company's integrity. Marcus understood exactly how to weaponize prejudices that already existed in corporate environments, how to make Maya's success seem suspicious rather than impressive. Maya watched her professional reputation come under attack from the safety of the corporate guest suite, monitoring social media and professional networks as false stories about her behavior spread through business circles with viral efficiency. She felt helpless in ways that were different but equally devastating as the physical violence. Watching years of careful relationship building being undermined by lies that were believable precisely because they played into existing stereotypes and suspicions. Jean Wu's response to the professional attacks demonstrated a level of public support that surprised Maya with its boldness and comprehensiveness. He held a company-wide meeting to address rumors about employee conduct, making it clear that Park Industries stood behind Maya's professional integrity without qualification or reservation, that any attempts to undermine her reputation would be treated as attacks on the company itself. The public support came with personal risks for Jean Wu, whose board of directors expressed concerns about his visible advocacy for an employee whose personal situation had become a corporate issue. Conservative board members questioned whether Jean Wu's judgment was being compromised by personal feelings, whether his protection of Maya was creating liability for the company, whether the professional boundaries necessary for effective leadership had been inappropriately breached. Jean Wu faced pressure to distance himself from Maya's situation, to allow human resources to handle the matter through standard corporate channels, to prioritize company interests over individual employee welfare. But his response to that pressure revealed the depth of his commitment to Maya and the strength of his convictions about leadership responsibility, his willingness to risk his own position to ensure her safety and professional survival. Maya watched Jean Wu defend her with a consistency that went beyond professional obligation, using his influence and resources in ways that demonstrated genuine care rather than calculated self-interest. When Marcus attempted to have Maya investigated for immigration fraud, Jean Wu provided legal representation that shut down the inquiry before it could gain momentum. When professional licensing boards received complaints about Maya's conduct, Jean Wu supplied character references and documentation that established her ethical standards beyond dispute. The comprehensive protection that Jean Wu provided began to change Maya's understanding of her own worth, helping her see herself through the eyes of someone who valued her intelligence, her integrity, her strength, rather than viewing her through the distorted lens of Marcus's resentment and control. For the first time in years, Maya began to remember who she had been before fear had shaped her choices, to reconnect with the confidence and ambition that had brought her professional success. Maya's healing process was not linear or simple, involving therapy sessions with counselors who specialized in helping women rebuild their lives after domestic violence, legal consultations that helped her understand her rights and options, medical care for injuries that had been inadequately treated during months of hiding trauma. But the most significant healing came from being valued and protected without conditions, from experiencing support that strengthened rather than diminished her independence. The confrontation with Marcus that tested Maya's newfound strength came when he violated the restraining order by appearing at the Park Industries building, demanding to speak with her about their relationship and her professional choices. Security contacted Maya immediately, offering to have Marcus arrested without her involvement, but Maya chose to face him herself, to demonstrate to both of them that she was no longer the woman who could be intimidated into silence. Maya met Marcus in the building lobby with Jean Wu and security personnel present, but at a distance that allowed her to speak for herself, to set boundaries with her own voice rather than relying entirely on protection provided by others. She told Marcus that their relationship was permanently over, that his behavior had eliminated any possibility of reconciliation, that further contact would result in immediate legal consequences that would affect his career and his freedom. Marcus attempted to use the familiar manipulation tactics that had once controlled Maya's behavior, alternating between threats and promises, accusations and apologies, reminders of their shared history and warnings about her uncertain future. But Maya recognized his strategies with the clarity of someone who had learned to see manipulation for what it was, and she responded with firm boundaries that left no room for negotiation or compromise. When Marcus finally understood that Maya would not be moved by his usual tactics, his mask of reasonableness fell away completely, revealing the rage and entitlement that had always driven his behavior. His threats in front of witnesses provided additional evidence for legal proceedings, his public display of anger demonstrating to anyone observing that Maya's fears had been justified and her protection necessary. Maya walked away from that confrontation with the knowledge that she had reclaimed her voice, her power, her right to make choices about her own life without fear of violent consequences. She had faced the person who had terrorized her for months and discovered that he had power over her only as long as she believed he did. That protection combined with personal strength could create safety that was both external and internal. The aftermath of the confrontation brought new clarity about her relationship with Jean Wu, whose feelings had been proven through actions rather than words, whose support had never come with expectations or conditions, whose love had manifested as respect for her agency rather than attempts to control her choices. Maya began to understand that healthy love could enhance rather than diminish her strength, that being cherished could coexist with being independent, that accepting care from someone who valued her autonomy was not the same as surrendering control to someone who resented her success. Jean Wu had risked his own reputation and corporate position to protect Maya, had used his resources to ensure her safety without expecting gratitude or compliance in return, had proven that his feelings for her were based on admiration for her strength rather than desire to possess or control her power. Maya realized that the man who had fallen in love with her professional competence and personal integrity was offering her partnership rather than domination, protection rather than possession, support rather than subjugation. 6 months later, Maya stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom in the Latte Hotel, addressing an audience of 300 business leaders gathered for the Seoul International Business Forum, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned that strength could emerge from the most devastating circumstances. The woman delivering the keynote address about resilience in corporate leadership bore little resemblance to the terrified executive who had once hidden bruises beneath carefully chosen clothing, and Maya felt a deep satisfaction in the transformation that had required courage she had not known she possessed. The speech Maya delivered that evening focused on finding unexpected support in professional environments, the importance of creating workplace cultures where vulnerability could coexist with leadership, the responsibility that successful individuals had to protect those who might be struggling in silence. She spoke about the power of authentic relationships in business, the way genuine care could transform both personal and professional outcomes, without explicitly referencing her own experience, but with emotional authenticity that resonated throughout the audience. Maya had testified against Marcus 3 months earlier, her statement delivered with the clarity and precision that had made her a formidable marketing executive, providing evidence that helped secure his conviction for domestic violence and stalking charges. The legal process had been emotionally demanding, but ultimately empowering, allowing Maya to reclaim her narrative while potentially protecting future women from experiencing the terror she had endured. The conviction had provided closure that went beyond personal satisfaction, creating legal precedent that would make it easier for other women in similar situations to seek protection and justice. Maya had worked with domestic violence advocacy groups to ensure that her case would be used to improve support systems for professional women whose careers made them particularly vulnerable to certain types of abuse and manipulation. Jean Wu had supported Maya throughout the legal proceedings with the same patient consistency that had characterized his approach to their developing relationship, providing resources and encouragement without pressuring her to make decisions about their personal connection while she focused on healing and legal resolution. His respect for her timing and autonomy had become one of the foundations of the trust that was slowly transforming their professional partnership into something deeper and more personal. Their romance had developed with the gradual naturalness of two people who had learned to value emotional safety above passion, whose attraction was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine admiration for each other's character. Jean Wu had never pressured Maya for commitments or declarations, instead demonstrating his feelings through continued support, thoughtful gestures, and the kind of patient devotion that allowed Maya to heal at her own pace, without fear of disappointing someone whose care she had come to treasure. Maya's parents had visited Seoul the previous month. Their initial concerns about her relationship with Jean Wu transformed into warm acceptance after witnessing the respect and tenderness with which he treated their daughter. Her mother had been particularly moved by Jean Wu's efforts to learn about Maya's family history, his genuine interest in understanding her cultural background, his commitment to ensuring that their relationship honored both their traditions while creating something uniquely their own. The cultural bridge building between their families had become one of Maya's greatest joys. Watching Jean Wu's parents embrace her with the same enthusiasm they showed for their own children, witnessing the way shared meals could transcend language barriers, observing how love could create understanding that went beyond cultural differences. Maya had learned basic Korean cooking from Jean Wu's mother, while teaching his family to appreciate the flavors of her grandmother's southern recipes, creating fusion traditions that reflected their combined heritage. Maya's professional life had continued to flourish in ways that validated all the risks she had taken to protect her career while seeking personal safety. The American retail expansion project had exceeded all projections, earning Maya recognition as one of the most innovative marketing executives in Asia, leading to speaking engagements and board positions that established her as a thought leader in cross-cultural business strategy. Her success felt different now, unencumbered by the fear that had once made every achievement feel precarious and temporary. Maya could celebrate her accomplishments without worrying that they would trigger violence at home, could accept recognition without calculating the personal cost of professional visibility, could build relationships with colleagues without fear that someone would use her connections against her. The evening of the business forum, Jean Wu waited for Maya in the hotel lobby with flowers that honored both their cultures, a bouquet that combined Korean peonies with magnolia branches from the southern United States, creating something beautiful that represented their individual histories and their shared future. His patience during her speech had been evident to anyone watching, his pride in her accomplishments clear in his expression, his love demonstrated through presence rather than possessiveness. After the event concluded and Maya had finished networking with business leaders who wanted to discuss collaboration opportunities, she and Jean Wu walked along the Han River under the Seoul city lights, their conversation ranging from business strategy to personal dreams, with the easy intimacy of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. Maya talked about her plans to establish a mentorship program for young women entering corporate leadership, her vision for creating support systems that could prevent other women from experiencing the isolation she had endured. Jin Woo shared his own evolving perspective on leadership responsibility. The way witnessing Maya's courage had changed his understanding of what it meant to use power and influence ethically. His commitment to ensuring that Park Industries became a model for supporting employees who might be facing personal crises that affected their professional lives. He spoke about his love for Maya with the kind of quiet certainty that required no dramatic declarations, his feelings evident in the careful attention he paid to her words, the protective way he positioned himself as they walked, the genuine happiness in his expression when she laughed. Maya realized that she had found the kind of love she had never believed possible, partnership that enhanced rather than diminished her independence, support that strengthened rather than limited her choices, admiration that celebrated rather than resented her success. Jin Woo loved her intelligence, her ambition, her strength, all the qualities that Marcus had tried to destroy, and his love had become a source of empowerment rather than vulnerability. When Jin Woo told Maya that he wanted to spend his life ensuring that she never again had to choose between personal happiness and professional success, that he considered her dreams as important as his own, that building a future together meant creating space for both their aspirations, Maya understood that she had discovered what healthy love looked like when it was offered by someone who valued her autonomy as much as her affection. Maya's response was delivered with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust her own judgment about people and relationships, who understood the difference between love that controlled and love that liberated, who had discovered that accepting care from the right person could increase rather than decrease her power. She told Jin Woo that she wanted to build something together that honored both their individual strength and their combined potential, a partnership that would allow them to support each other's growth, while creating a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine equality. The kiss they shared beside the Han River was not the desperate embrace of two people trying to escape their problems, but the tender connection of two individuals who had chosen each other with full knowledge of the challenges they had overcome and the dreams they hoped to achieve together. Maya felt the last traces of fear leave her body as she accepted love that had been proven through crisis, support that had been tested through difficulty, partnership that promised to enhance rather than complicate her carefully rebuilt life. As they walked back toward the city center, Maya reflected on the unexpected ways that strength could emerge from vulnerability, how the worst experiences of her life had led her to the best relationship she had ever known, how learning to accept help had ultimately made her more rather than less independent. She had discovered that love could be a source of empowerment when it was offered by someone who understood that caring for someone meant supporting their autonomy rather than controlling their choices. Maya thought about all the viewers who might be listening to her story, wondering if they had ever experienced the kind of support that could transform crisis into opportunity, whether they had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected people could become the strongest advocates for our safety and success. How finding the courage to accept help from the right person could change everything about our understanding of what was possible in our lives. The future that stretched ahead of Maya and Jin Woo was built on foundations of mutual respect, proven loyalty, and the kind of love that had survived the ultimate test of character and commitment, promising possibilities that neither of them could have imagined when they first began working together as colleagues who were trying to build bridges between cultures while protecting their individual dreams and aspirations.